And we are live with an episode of, well, it isn't the Oxpath News, it's the Gentleman Gamer live with an AMA, RPG, Q&A, FTL, what else? ABC, ATF, FBI, CIA. We could go on and probably will. Thank you very much for those of you who decided to add this to your calendar, who decided to tune in and watch this live after it was announced. I thought I'd try something different, you see, because I tend to be a pretty spontaneous individual when it comes to streaming. I very rarely plan these things out in advance because my schedule tends to be quite hectic and I only end up missing things. And so in this case, I decided I'll do my best. I'll do my damnedest to announce in advance that I was running this stream. And so that's what I've done. Here I am. And for some of you, that's going to come as a reward. Well, you never know, because I'm actually here on time. Would you believe it? So hello to those of you who are already tuning in. There's only a small handful of you, but that's absolutely fine. It's only really, you're the special ones. Everyone else is what do you say? Cruft chaff, peasants, if you like, the ignorant masses. And so here we are to talk about many things, whether it's Trinity Continuum Aether, which is the main cause celeb, I suppose, of this entire stream, which I will, of course, hasten to say, if you haven't backed it on Kickstarter yet, it is the thing I'm going to be hammering on about during the course of this video, this stream. If you haven't backed Aether yet, I do encourage you to do so, because as the artwork previewing this video showed, it's a game of redcoats versus Martians and people experimenting with their bodies, the Aether, with devices, with advanced technology, super science that people don't quite understand. You've got Edison, you've got Tesla, you've got Dracula, you've got Holmes, you've got Moriarty, you have got all of these figures of 19th century fiction. It's looking great, and we have well surpassed 200% funding on our Kickstarter campaign, which is frankly, well, beyond any of our imaginings. So thank you so much. It's always a risk when we pursue a brand new project like this, a brand new IP. And this is a new expansion to the Trinity Continuum universe. And my first big book for Trinity, most of the time I spend my time in the world of darkness, and they came from Lines. So yeah, it's a thrill to see it do so well. If you haven't checked it out yet, please do so, because we're all very proud of it. Now, I'm going to address some of the people who have turned in already. As I mentioned in the title and in my preview for this video, this is an AMA. So if you have questions, you are here to ask them, I hope, not just to hear me rambling until someone fills the air with a pithy request. So let's see, what have we got here? Schrodinger's cat says greetings, or do they? Qualia Redux says hello. Hello, Qualia. We will speak on Monday. Hello, Andrew, the elite few indeed. Well, the Elite Few has expanded now to the Elite 20, but I'm sure we can cut some people. There we go. It went down to 19 again. Good evening to Velvet Tea Cake, and awesome to Grant Jacobson. Then we have a Cyrillic name that I'm not going to try pronouncing. Hello, are you familiar with the world of Fallen London? If so, what is your opinion on it? Well, I've been to London. I'm not sure what you mean, though, the world of Fallen London. Or do you mean the Fall of London, the V5 book? That was a book I was attached to very briefly. I was as part of the initial discussions on that book. I stepped off quite early on for various reasons. So I don't have a huge familiarity with that book. I can comment on it to a degree, but it wasn't one of mine. I think I am credited in there, but to be honest, that credit is too generous, considering my contribution was entirely limited by design. Stefan says, hi, folks, and I say, hi, Stefan. Now, please, if you have any questions, especially if it's to do with Aether, I will be pleased to answer them. But nothing's off the table. You know me, I'm an open book. I like to talk to people. I like to hear what you have to say. I want to hear your questions, whether it's about RPGs, whether it's about a specific game, whether it's about the world, whether it's about me, whether it's about you, whether it's about God or hell or life itself. We can get philosophical if you want. We can even get political. I know a lot of people don't like that. But this Time is yours. I made it just for you. And Ivan says it's an RPG setting. I haven't heard about it then. No, Fallen London is not a setting I know of. Maybe you can tell us more. I see we've got some more people commenting on the subject. Fallen London is an online game based on a Victorian London sold to eldritch beings as part of a pact between Queen Victoria and the Masters of the Bazaar, says James Ellsbury. That's interesting. No, I haven't, but I'm going to check it out. Sounds quite Neverwhere-ish almost. Pavel says hello. Andrew says, any new World of Darkness projects you're working on, Gentleman Gamer? If by that you mean World of Darkness projects, I contributed quite a lot to the Chapters board game, which is now starting to see production and shipping. That's a game that expanded in content, has taken a while to get to where it is now, but it's finally there. It's all fully written, it's being translated, and soon it's going to be dispatched out by Flyos Games. That game was a huge amount of fun to contribute to. I really love it. I think everyone who plays Chapters is going to love that Vampire the Masquerade board game. I have contributed some to Retaliation as well, which is the Werewolf the Apocalypse follow-up, I guess. I also contributed a little to Vampire the Masquerade Swan Song, mainly along the lines of Consultation. This is the video game that came out not long ago. And, of course, the Boston by Night source book that was released as a special PDF. Oh, and the novellas that went out with Swan Song. So, yeah, I've done a bit of World of Darkness work recently. Of course, I oversee the Mage the Ascension and Werewolf the Apocalypse stuff that we're doing at Onyx Path 2. If you're looking, however, for any new V5 books, no, I've not worked on any new V5 books recently. I imagine there's a few reasons for that. One, I just don't have anything assigned to me, but I also haven't really pursued anything. I'm very much enjoying working on projects that aren't Vampire the Masquerade for a while, because I've contributed a lot of time over 5 years now of writing for Vampire. And it's good to have a break from that occasionally. This is why I've developed books like Aether for the Trinity Continuum, why The World Below is the new big fantasy game that I've conceptualized, I'm overseeing for Onyx Path, and more on that will be released as and when we can. And of course, the They Came From line, which is very healthy indeed. It's doing very well. I'm very pleased to see that. So, yeah, of course, by New World of Darkness, you may have said meant Chronicles of Darkness. And in terms of Chronicles of Darkness, I'm overseeing some of those books as well now. Nothing that hasn't already been announced. The Book of Lasting Death for Mummy the Curse will be coming out soon. That has new playable options, new powers, new utterances, new antagonists. I love a book with new player options and storyteller options, which I think a lot of people are going to love. I've helped in my overseer role push Tome of the Pentacle for Mage the Awakening, Kith and Kin, and The Hedge for Changing the Lost, and Mage the Awakening, respectively. But the other way around, forward on the schedule. So, yeah, I'm overseeing a fair amount on Chronicles of Darkness too, but I'm not starting any new projects for it. Grant Jacobson says, do you have any experience with Deviant the Renegade? I recently created a character for Deviant the Renegade, Grant, called Wild Joe, who was someone who just took a wrong turn on a mountain one day and ended up in a test site. That was with the Onyx Pathcast crew, myself, Eddie Webb, Dixie Cochran. We were going through creating characters for Mummy the Cursed, Deviant the Renegades, and Hunter the Vigil. And yeah, that was a lot of fun. I've yet to play Deviant, I will confess. I ran a little of it. I always find it indispensable. This is just me. Not every developer agrees, but if I'm developing a book with a playable option in, like a splat, as in a full game line like Deviant, I have to run it to really wrap my head around it. And so when I've developed co-developed Dark Eras 2 and solo developed Contagion Chronicle, which are big crossover games, I had to put myself through running all these different Chronicles of Darkness games or playing them because I needed to learn how these games played. It's just the way my mind works. And so this is why sometimes people wonder, how is it that I manage to run around 7 different games a month? So one of them weekly. And, well, sometimes 8, in fact, thinking about it. So what am I running right now? So for my local group, I'm running Eclipse Phase. For my for streaming, I'm running Trinity Continuum Aether. For the Patreon groups that I've got going on, which you can sign up to today, patreon.com/Matthew Dawkins, I'm running Vampire the Dark Ages, Werewolf the Wild West, Wraith the Oblivion, Delta Green, Eclipse Phase again. I'm going to be forgetting one right now, aren't I? I think I am. But either way, it's a lot of games. It's a lot of games on the go. And it is a lot of work, but at the same time, this is what helps my imagination stay fresh and allows me to work across loads of different game lines because I get to play around with so many. So let's see, what else do we have here? So Pavel says, how can one become like God in Trinity Continuum Aether? One can become like God by becoming a Magog in Trinity Continuum Aether. Yes, you may inherit some deviations. Yes, you may want to pursue a redemption arc. And this part of the manuscript will be released very soon. But the powers that Magogs have access to that are attribute locked, some of them are keyword locked, as in Magog locked. So you get access to gifts that are related to Magogs exclusively, or they require a certain attribute rating. I think that's the correct way to put it. So yeah, so for instance, here's a Magog gift from Aether. The keywords are intellect is a constant power. You need to be a Magog. You need an intellect of 4 or above to use it. This is called complete genius. During her mortal days, she'd have struggled with such complex calculations. Now she could perform the equations in her head. She marveled at the potential her long lifespan and newfound acumen represented. The secrets of the universe would reveal themselves to her in their native tongue, mathematics. System. Upon acquiring this gift, the Magog's mental scale increases by their reflective facet. If their reflective facet increases after acquiring this gift, their mental scale increases accordingly. So when I say that this is how you become a god, if your facet is going up, your scale is going up. And understand the scale system where your power will increase exponentially does mean that mentally your character can become a god. This is just one of very many powers that you have access to as a Magog in Trinity Continuum Aether. So yeah, want to become a god? Become a Magog and take all the penalties that come with it. No, it's not that many. It's not awful. Shouldn't phrase it like that. But there should always be some kind of cost to wielding the powers of gods, whether it's narrative or system-based. And none of these debilitate play, I would say. Mr. Pickles says, have I got any insight on what is happening with Bloodlines 2? No, I had limited involvement with Bloodlines 2 when I was working on V5 way back in 2017 and 18. I was able to see the design of it going on, could comment on some stuff, got to see a lot of the opening, the sort of prologue scenario, some of the characters that were being used, things like that, characters that appeared in the original Bloodlines and that kind of thing. But since then, I've had no involvement, so I have no insight. I'm told that it hasn't been cancelled, but I have no idea. And honestly, there's so many World of Darkness video games and other products coming out right now that I'm not that bothered about it. I know some people really get upset when a game they're hyped about hasn't come out yet, but the way I see it, for instance, I'm really keen on Hollow Knight. Hollow Knight is probably one of my favorite games of the last 5-10 years, and I'm really looking forward to Silksong, the sequel that was just an expansion but is now a full-blown sequel. But I don't torture myself when I don't hear anything. I just play something else. And if I'm really keen on playing a Metroidvania, I'll play something like, I don't know, Blasphemous or Ender Lilies or Metroid Dread or any other of the fantastic Metroidvanias that are out. So anyone here that's interested in Bloodlines 2, forget about it until it comes out or doesn't. That's my advice. Taladell says, reading Aether about Gogs, it says you could make a temporary change in reality even in themselves. So then does that mean everything from being able to fly or regrow limbs can work? In theory, yeah. The Gogs in Aether require apparatus in order to do that kind of thing, where Magogs can internalize it and are basically Aether batteries, so they can effectively implement change without any kind of extraneous device. So Gogs do have limitations to what they can do, but that by no means weakens them. Yes, where Magog's powers are attribute locked, Gogs are skill locked. So earlier I was saying about how one of the Magog gifts requires an intellect of 4 or above. A skill-based gift might be something like, I'll find one. Here's a nice simple one. Close combat based. It's a GOG power called Into the Middle of Next Week. So it's the close combat skill. You have to be a GOG. It's a momentary power. 4 dots required. As her fist connected with the marshal's jaw, the man disappeared in a puff of green smoke. Taking the moment's reprieve, she collected her satchel and left the room before he returned. System. In an egregious violation of temporal mechanics, your character channels Aether into a time-shifting attack. Spend 1 inspiration to gain access to the temporal strike stunt until the end of the scene, and that stunt is then laid out. I'm not going to read all of it out for you, but you get the idea. They're still very powerful gifts you have access to as a GOG. So what else do we have? Lots of questions, so I'm glad you're embracing the spirit of an Ask Me Anything. Mr. Pixel says, love the show, Steve. Steve is not my name, but I'll take it. Thomas Sawyer says, has on it. My name is Matthew Dawkins. Patreon.com, Matthew Dawkins, or MatthewDawkins.com. I recommend all of you check out MatthewDawkins.com, in fact, because not only will you find my entire list of credits on there, at least updated to about 2 months ago, you can get some books on discount if you click on the links. So, yeah. Thomas Sawyer says, has Onyx Path ended work on Chronicles of Darkness lines? I haven't seen any news for that recently. No, we've still got plenty of Chronicles of Darkness books on the go, but they are all the ones we've announced. I don't think we're keeping anything back. Chronicles of Darkness is a Paradox property, so ultimately it requires Paradox to approve pitches or ask us to make books for it. And if that's not happening, we will work on the ones we are working on and then see what happens. Grant says, what is the most memey character build that you have brewed up for Trinity Continuum Aether? I don't know if I've built up a memey character. Someone who just does silly things that... I had someone who basically... I was calling this interrupter character who can basically puff into existence at the most inconvenient times. So, for instance, say someone's about to be declared guilty of a crime and appears in a trial with an objection, or interrupts an affair between the Prince of Wales and one of his mistresses, just standing there at the end of the bed. Hello, I've got. That was stupid, but you do have powers that you can do that kind of thing with. Michael Holbrook says, excited for the world below. Me too. We're hard at work on that, and I'm very much looking forward to seeing what comes of it. Stephen Leese, I should say, what's your favourite setting to write in at the moment? Well, I'm going to be slightly biased here and say the world below, because it's an upcoming game. It is brand new. The IP is brand new. It's all from my head, although, of course, the writers who are contributing to it are contributing a lot too. And it's just fantastic to write in a game that has such a focus of vision. I don't mean to sound pretentious or anything, but I have definitely got a plan in mind for the world below, and the writers are doing such a fantastic job, not just from a setting perspective, but also a system perspective, and really evoking that underworld dystopian but somewhat aspirant feeling to it. There's this exploration side, which is very, very important, but there's also survival that goes with it. It's an entirely subterranean setting, as the name implies. Go up to the surface, bad things will happen, but not very good things happen in the underground as well. You basically have to make the best of a terrible situation, and some of the best can be wondrous things, but they can also be horrifying things. We will release more from the world below, of course, as we go along. I intend to do it through open development, which is the first time in a long time for an Onyx Path game for us to do that. But that's because I want people to be involved and get enthusiastic about it. XMally28 says, "Hey gentlemen, glad to see you're doing well. When are you going to announce your takeover of WWE? I think it's a bit late for that now. What are you looking forward to the most in the coming year?" Well, I mean, that's a broad question, isn't it? In terms of role-playing games in the coming year, what am I looking forward to the most? So something that I definitely know will definitely be released in the coming year. You know, it's a game I don't talk about a lot, but I'm very much looking forward to the Kickstarter or crowdfunding campaign, I should say, of Scion God, because I took over oversight of the Scion line a couple of months ago, and I had the access to the entire manuscript for God. Hiromi Kota does a fantastic job as the content lead on Scion, gives direction to all the developers, knows where to make the decisions and so on. I just have to basically approve, unapprove, provide commentary, whatever. And I was blown away because it is so difficult to make a game where you can play as gods and yet still impose limitations without making you feel like you're not gods, if you see what I mean. And somehow this game does it. Not only does it introduce more pantheons, everyone loves the pantheons in Scion, it makes godlike play accessible and still feel godlike. That's no small feat. So I'm really looking forward to seeing how well that does. But good question. Andrew Bridget says, "New Mage stuff sounds cool. Thanks for answering." Well, if you're interested in new Mage stuff, if you go over to theonyxpath.com now, you will find that M20 Sorcerer has been released. That's right, we have released Sorcerer. So Sorcerer had a second edition way back in the late 90s. It has not had an edition since then. And so now we have released Sorcerer for Mage the Ascension 20th Anniversary Edition. It's a game that I think has flown under the radar for some people, but we have released it, and I am very enthusiastic to see how well it does. It was a bit of a gamble doing this game because it was one of the, I guess it was considered one of the black books for World of Darkness way back when. You had things like this, you had World of Darkness Tokyo, I think Mafia, you had Mummy, the original Mummy before Resurrection, and they were always very small, marginalized books, but Sorcerer was probably the most popular of them. So yeah, I'll be interested to see how this does. James Ellsbury says, "In some of your previous videos when the Baali come up, the characters you play are generally disparaging about their existence. Out of character, is this an opinion you somewhat share, or is it more in-setting view?" Really good question, James. It's something I've not thought about for some time. I'm all in favor of having the Baali or Infernalists in general in games of Vampire the Masquerade. I actually quite like having some, just few, but some black and white antagonists. I enjoy the shades of grey and very dark grey that exist among clans like the Followers of Set and the Zimishi and so on, although I don't particularly like it being narrowed down to one clan. But with the Baali, or Baali if you prefer, I think the appeal to me is that sometimes a group is just cursed and wrong and sick and sinful and twisted, and I like that about them. Where I don't like them, and this is a case of personal choice, is the need to give them a redemptive arc. I don't see the need to make them secretly the good guys who are trying to save the world. I find that completely misses the point of what the Baali should be, which is these are the rare few vampires that Cameron and Sabat would team up to get rid of. I like having an antagonist like that. You know, it's the Hordak of World of Darkness. It's for the Christmas special, we will see, or we might even see the Horde and Skeletor and He-Man team up to get rid of King Cobra or whatever his name was from Snake Mountain. Actually, no, Skeletor lives in Snake Mountain. Maybe he stole it from the Snake Man. I don't know, but I know what I'm talking about. So yes, in character, I always disparage the Baali because they're supposed to be rumors, myths, innuendos. But out of character, there is a good use for them. I just don't like seeing them as tragic. I actually like seeing them as people who have willingly embraced everything that is wrong and corrupt in the world. Qualia asks, what about Trinity Continuum Aether appeals to me as a player? As a player, it's the setting more than anything. I love the system, don't get me wrong, but the setting is something that just gets my gears whirring appropriately enough because it's steampunk, it's 19th century. There's a strong sort of British vibe, although I think you have to take it with a pinch of salt because the Empire is a demonstrably cruel and callous organization. Colonization, what we, the British, did to the world is not to be applauded. There's certainly some progress was made under the dominion of the Empire, but at the same time, great cruelty, sadism, and racism, and all sorts of other things. Aether gives you a way in to that exposes you to another form of colonization, but this time it's from space, from Mars. So all of a sudden, humanity does have to band together, regardless of cultural differences. And I don't see it as utopic. I think there's still plenty of room for backbiting, betrayal, and the like. But I do enjoy looking at the 19th century through a lens that says, well, maybe if we could stop being shits to each other for a little while and deal with the larger threat above our heads, that makes for a interesting plot for me. Plus the experimenting with super science and experimental inventions is great fun as well. Plus double plus, I enjoy the literature of the era. I mean, it's where most of the classics were formed, and that's why so many of them appear in the game. So long-winded answer. I never give brief answers, as you know. Matthias says, hello, Mr. Dawkins. Big fan of your work. Can you share any interesting moment from your weekly games? Cheers from Brazil. Yeah, so weekly games. I'm running Eclipse phase. We recently, let's think, what's a short way of telling this story? Because a very long, a lengthy mystery game. But one of the characters basically, the firewall team, the protagonists, were able to extract a server from what was basically a luxury resort station. The server was jam-packed with cortical stacks. That's egos, minds of people who have basically logged themselves in, and one of them was infected with an exsurgent virus. And exsurgent viruses are bad news. They can spell the death of transhumanity. And there was a big sort of heist. They managed to snatch this server away from this luxury orbital station and fly off with it, and they were determined to destroy it. But this server is like a black box. This is a luxury station. They're not going to risk the mines being destroyed by fire or cold void or anything like that. So destroying it actually takes some doing. And in the end, they landed on the moon and decided they would get in touch with the Lunar Lagrange Alliance, which is the sort of faction in control of the moon, very militaristic, very imperial. And they wanted to make a deal with them. You destroy this. This is a bad thing. We know you hate exsurgent viruses. We know you're very keen on the protection of transhumanity. And the Lunar Lagrange Alliance basically said, yeah, we'll take it away and deal with it. But the players were pretty paranoid by this point and sure that what they would actually do is try and access it and steal all the information off of it, which could have led to them getting infected with this virus too. And so what the player characters did in the end was refuse to relinquish it. There was a standoff, and the players ended up overriding the self-destruct on their ship and blew their ship up with this thing on. We've now jumped to 8 months later and picking up the fallout, because the good thing in Eclipse phase is you can back up your consciousness, your ego, and come back in a new body. Or if your cortical stack isn't destroyed, it can be recovered by someone, plugged into a new morph, a new body somewhere. So yeah, there's a lot of pieces to pick up on this one, but that was good fun. Velvet TK says, what would your dream crossover book be? I think that's a really good question, because I have been hammering on for a long time now about how the They Came Froms are all crossover books. By design, you can use any archetype from any They Came From and any other They Came From. You can use any cinematic, any quip, any trope, any stunt, anything. Every single one of the They Came Froms is crossover compatible, to the point that I was running a They Came From classified espionage game that had a survivor archetype from Beneath the Sea, along with all their tropes, and a mystic from Beyond the Grave, like a Solitaire from Live and Let Die, in this classified campaign as well. It went on for quite a long time too. And rather than me wanting to make another crossover game, I want people to realize this. I want people to see it and think, wow, okay, we can actually blend all of this stuff together. That's a stupid number of playable options. That's a ridiculous number of powers we can play with now. This game is amazing. They Came From is doing very well, don't get me wrong. But I think when people start cottoning on to the fact that it's a game that is completely built for this kind of crossover, that every book feeds into the other without requiring any of the additional books, it could really become something else. Other than that, if we're speaking about Chronicles or World of Darkness, I want to avoid crossover books like the plague. And the reason is because developing the Contagion Chronicle, and to a lesser extent Dark Eras 2, required a hell of a lot of work. I mentioned having to run a lot of games, play a lot of games, but mainly it's learning the rules for every single game. And Chronicles of Darkness has got something like 12, 13 different game lines, and I wanted to know them well enough so that they were each represented well. And that's not an easy thing to do, even with the best team in the world. So I'm quite happy staying focused on different games for a while. Pavel says, Trinity Continuum Aether happens during the end of the 19th century. How will the game showcase the not that great side of the imperialism facilitated by the greater colonial states? Good question, Pavel. Because, as mentioned, the empires of the world weren't all lights and cake. They were terrible to an awful lot of people, millions of people. And one of the best ways we can show that without making the game feel utterly miserable is by encouraging you to play members of the various societies from parts of the world that are subject to colonization, or just from cultures that are outside that sort of imperial milieu. So, for instance, the Three Prongs are a very Raj-focused group. We also have the Kino Nobushi from Japan. Japan isn't subject to colonization, of course, but it was going through the Meiji Restoration, which was in part impacted or driven by its exposure to other parts of the world. We have the Os Viajantes, which is the Brazilian group, which again, somewhat subject to colonization when you consider the Portuguese monarchy and the like. So there's lots of different ways in, and if we can expand Aether at all, I would love to see more factions. The one thing I want to avoid is making a big travelogue. In general, I've developed an awful lot of books that are travelogues. This is what's going on in this country. This is what's going on in this city, in this country, and so on. And they always seem like a great idea. They always seem like a lot of fun. Some people read them and they lap this kind of information up. But the cold, hard truth of it, as I find it, is you could write the best setting in the world set in a country that most of your players aren't going to come from, and they will feel too intimidated to ever actually set a game there or use that information. And it isn't necessarily because they're racist or bigots or because the information is bad. It's because they're afraid of doing the wrong thing. Now, that isn't to say you shouldn't give those places in the world representation, but I think there does need to be a certain cognizance to the fact that you are writing a book that needs to be used. This is where my utilitarian mind comes in. I prefer to focus more on player tools than flowery setting stuff. So I would rather put things in the hands of players who want to play characters from those parts of the world than just say, and this is what that part of the world looked like in 1895, if you see what I mean. So yeah, it's a constant struggle because you definitely want to appeal to a diverse crowd. You definitely want to be multicultural. You definitely don't want to push anyone to the side and say, well, this is all about rah, rah, rah. Wasn't the British Empire great? And at the same time, you can't spend all the pages you want talking about an island in, I don't know, an ocean where fewer than 1% of your audience are going to come from or have any relatability to, and therefore aren't going to ever set a game there. It's awkward, and it's a conversation that needs to be had. So yeah. Let's see, what else do we have here? Brian Smith says, see you have the Alien RPG. I do indeed have the Alien RPG. What do I think? I think it's a very good Alien RPG. One thing I love about the Free League games is not only their presentation, which I think is their top thing, it's that they don't need to reinvent the wheel system-wise to make their games work, whether it's an Alien or Blade Runner or Tales from the Loop, I should say, or any number of the games they have created. Free League doesn't try and revolutionize gaming with their games. What they do is present very accessible, pretty normal systems, and they present them in a stunning way, in a way that is aesthetically brilliant. We've had an Alien RPG before, Aliens RPG by Leading Edge Games, and that was bland as all hell. There were parts of it I loved, but it was bland, I can tell you that. And it barely sold because there were lots of licensed RPGs at the time, and this one didn't stand out. Obviously, it was a different time as well, but this Alien RPG by Free League looks beautiful. The One Ring looks beautiful, and that is really a key to grabbing the customer's attention. Grant Jacobson says, do I think someone could run a Hollow Knight Silksong-esque Chronicle in the world below? I certainly hope so, Grant, because it's one of the key inspirations. You will be able to identify the DNA of Hollow Knight throughout the world below, I imagine, if I've done my job right, because Hollow Knight is a fantastic game, and if people haven't played it, looked it up, I recommend doing so. DP says, any new They Came From products on the horizon? Well, what have we got? Classified, which is our espionage game. Cyclops Cave, which is our fantasy cinema game. We will have jump starts for both of those. We also have They Came From the Danger Zone, which is the action movie game, which I'm very excited by. Slow motion explosions, walking away, fighting on the wings of planes mid-flight, that sort of thing. That's all good fun. I'm very much looking forward to Danger Zone, but I think, and I change my mind on this routinely, my most anticipated one is Classified. I just love the genre. I love the way it's presented. I don't think any They Came From book has been written so well as Classified. Not to diminish any of them. We shouldn't have a favorite child, but Classified is up there for me, and I hope more people get to see it. Lady Gates says, hey, Gentleman Gamer, I'm really excited for you to be a part of the Giovanni LARP coming up next year. Oh, thank you very much, Lady Gates. I don't know that I'm playing in the Giovanni LARP. This is the Last Supper live-action roleplay. If you haven't signed up for it, do so. It's going to be set in a big mansion, costumes, all that kind of things. What my contribution to it is the writing. I was hired to write an awful lot of the characters for that. It was great fun. That's actually a World of Darkness product I hadn't spoken about, in fact, to anyone, really. But yeah, I've written the biographies for a ton of characters for this Convention of Thorns era, Last Supper, 1444 era. Live action roleplay, which I think it is the first live action roleplay book or game I have contributed to as an author. Fancy that. But yeah, I hope a lot of people have a lot of fun. It looks like, I mean, I know the person running it, I know Delia, I know the team, and I think that they will do a superb job. Meme.the-node says, good to see the sorcerers getting some love. When my friend wanted to make a sorcerer recently, I was stuck trying to convert Revise to M20. This is a perfect timing. It wouldn't have been that hard to convert Revise to M20, but I'm glad M20 Sorcerer is going to scratch that itch. King Hiss DP, you're quite right. And Skeletor did steal Snake Mountain from the Snake Men. Well, that makes sense. Mr. Pixel says, favorite setting out of modern Gothic or historical Gothic? Ooh. Historical Gothic now. I've done my time in the modern era. I have written, as I say, a lot of Masquerade. And there's plenty of modern era games, modern era horror games I do enjoy writing for, don't get me wrong. But right now, my trend goes toward historical. So, for instance, I'm really enjoying Aether because of the Gothic Victorian parts. I am also really enjoying Werewolf of the Wild West. I always enjoy Vampire the Dark Ages. So yeah, I'm not, I wouldn't say burned out on the modern era. I've just done a lot of it, so it's nice to explore other parts. So what else do we have here? Brian Smith says, thank you for your answer. Alien is very good. It is. And Bright Valley says, hey, GG. 07, which I think is someone saluting, I guess. Lady Gates says, thank you for your answer. I'm playing one of the rare custom Setite characters. Yeah, why do the Setites never get enough love at these things? We shouldn't have to make custom Setites. There should be a whole plethora of them. Emerald Coast Archer, I'm guessing all the way from Seattle, says, greetings all, unless you are Green Arrow. Qualia says, favorite weird era of history? Go. A weird era of history. My favorite weird era of history. What is a weird era of history? I mean, my specialist subjects, were this to be a history quiz, would probably be late Middle Ages, sort of War of the Roses era England, Scotland, Wales, and I guess to an extent Ireland and northern France. So everything from around 1300 to 1500 or thereabouts. But most specifically, my specialist subject is 1912 to 1939 Russia. Focusing on the lead up to the revolution, probably actually starting earlier with the Winter Revolution, 1905. Going from 1905 to 1939 and the various historical tumult that Russia went through. I think running a game, playing a game, telling a story set in that period is always fantastic. I always have so many ideas. I mean, if you're a long-term subscriber to my channel, before I made a lot of my videos private, I did run an actual play of Wraith the Oblivion, which was set in Russia. And I think it was around the time of the fall of communism. But the underworld version of Russia was kind of stuck in this stagnant 1917 period where the Bolshevik Revolution was taking place or kicking off, and that was a lot of fun. But yes, that's an era I've read up on a great deal. I have written a fair amount about it. There's an awful lot of it that appears in my work, especially in Vampire the Masquerade. I mean, you may not be familiar, you may not be aware of how much of it has been written into Vampire the Masquerade, especially 5th edition, but there is a lot in there, whether it's references to characters or individuals, events. Basically, I've used an awful lot of the Russian Revolution to inform my work on things like anarchs and Camarilla and hierarchies and revolutions, civil wars, and the like that have taken place in vampire history, because that is a period of history that fascinates me. The individuals involved fascinate me as well. I can't say I have any great admiration for any of them. Maybe one, but they're all pretty morally bankrupt by the end of the Civil War, if not before. But I think that the events that Russia and ultimately the Soviet Union went through in those 20 plus years of its formation really, they tell a very interesting story. They present a fascinating and tragic backdrop. So there you go. There you go. So yeah, and I bet no one was expecting that. Taladale says, do you have a preferred sword you admire, would like to own? For me, it's the Xiphos from the ancient Greeks. I don't actually, Tal. That's a really good question as well. I know I keep telling people they've had really good questions, but it's I have never been a weapons enthusiast. I've never owned antique weapons. I've never owned ceremonial weapons. I've never wanted to fire a gun. I never have. I've never taken archery or sword practice even for fun, at some sort of leisure retreat. Never ever appeals to me, and I have no idea why. This is just not a bone in my body that makes me want to do anything like that. And so yeah, unfortunately I have to say no. Weapons do not hold any appeal over me. Velvet TK says, what is your biggest bugbear when you're writing historical? When I'm writing historical, it is sourcing the information to present a balanced and yet enthralling tale. That's the thing. I mean, you can look at a big example is a Roman emperor like Caligula, who I think most people would agree is a mildly disturbed individual prone to certain decadent acts. And so it's very easy to tell a story or write a story about existence in the court of Caligula, although there's not much to say what life would have been like for the average Roman or subject in that time, because most Roman history related to that era, that entire Julius Caesar through to Nero period, the Julio Augustan period, is wholly based on the ruling class. There's a reason for that, but also the vast majority of writings, if not all of the writings, were written decades after the death of the emperor in question, when a new regime was in charge that didn't want the previous one celebrated. Now, you see this kind of thing occur many times throughout history. And of course, with a character like Caligula, again, we look at that person as a lunatic, dangerous, probably responsible for the slaughter of hundreds, if not thousands, probably thousands, if not tens of thousands of his own subjects. But all we know is what people wrote about many, many years after, under a regime that wanted him discredited. And that this isn't my effort to rehabilitate Caligula or Nero or Claudius or any of the other. No, Julio Claudian emperor would have been what I should have said. But it does present an interesting quandary when you're trying to write history, whether you're trying to write a story historically. You can look at the same thing throughout pretty much everything 600 CE AD, all the way through to the Reformation and Renaissance, because the church had absolute control over literacy in most parts of Europe at the very least. And what that means is you get the church's take on things, on kings, on queens, on lords and ladies, on scandals, on uprisings. You get chroniclers who not only are working from the church's perspective, but are also prone to amending things to suit them. A very good example historically is the way the Tudors Obviously, that's a reformation, but the way the Tudors and an individual like Shakespeare wrote about someone like Richard III. Richard III, undoubtedly a warlord, undoubtedly seized the throne. There doesn't seem to be any doubt surrounding that. That he put his nephews or what have you in the tower and all this, that, and the other. But the common history related to that came years after his death, during a regime led by people that were opposed to his family. A family, the Tudors, who were so paranoid about being seen as undeserving of the throne that their name never appears anywhere on literature of the time. You will never see Henry Tudor referred to. You'll never see Elizabeth Tudor referred to. It will always, of course, be Queen Elizabeth, King Henry, Queen Mary, King Edward, and so on. Because if you assign a common name to a royal family, they all of a sudden sound very much less royal. And so it's only after them, and only after they've died, that they start being referred to as Tudors. And so you get this problem when writing history, whether it's for games or anything, quite frankly, where you have to choose a side or basically put your hands up and say, look, there's an awful lot we don't know, and this is going to be as balanced as we can, with the risk that balance can bring with it a certain dilution, a certain greyness to the subject matter, because most of those vivid tales of Richard III being this stabby manipulator, that's Shakespeare. Shakespeare lived in the time of Richard III's successors, who did not want Richard III celebrated. So yeah, it's an interesting one, but again, no such thing as a short answer with me. Grant says, have you been able to utilize the conspiracies from Deviant the Renegades in other games? I've gotten a lot of utility from using them in Mage games when players try making a Mage-eyed business. You know what? I haven't yet, but it's a really good idea, because I often use Pentex, of course, from Werewolf the Apocalypse, in all of my World of Darkness games, or its subsidiaries, I do anyway. And I have used the Chiron group from Hunter the Vigil in a lot of other games in a sort of Magadon Pharmaceuticals capacity. So using the conspiracy from Deviant the Renegades is eminently sensible as well. Emerald Coast Archer says, greetings, Dark Ages Vampire is my favorite. Just finished a long-term campaign myself. The story began in 350 AD and continued until final night. Your videos really helped, Gentleman Gamer. Well, I'm very glad you enjoyed it. Dark Ages Vampire, my series on it, was one of the most popular sets of videos I did way back in the day. It really seemed to make a lot of people fall in love with the game. I should have earned a commission for it. And you come from the Gulf Coast of Florida. Well, I hope it's not too warm. James says, if someone wanted to set a game in a historical setting, where would you recommend going to research the period? Well, I mean, you know, the easiest thing to do is go on Wikipedia, but I wouldn't say Wikipedia is necessarily the best. It's a lot better than it used to be. Your best bet is to find digestible pieces of that historical setting on YouTube. YouTube is actually a better source, I would say, than Wikipedia, because information presented in an interactive, in a vivid, visual fashion is often more gripping. But it really depends on how far you want to go. I think you can get bogged down in the detail and lose sight of the fun when you go into historical, much as you can with sci-fi. If you go too hard with your sci-fi, well, that doesn't make sense scientifically. Well, Fast and Light very rarely does. But if you are really wanting to set a game in a historical setting, my advice is look on YouTube for a documentary or a breakdown. There are so many fantastic history channels on YouTube now that aren't the History Channel or Discovery, that you find a good podcast. And if that whets your appetite for the setting, then you go to the library or the bookstore and you find a book or two by some good authors. As an example, I was talking about the Russian Revolution. If people are interested in the Russian Revolution, one of the best places they can go is go to the videos where historian and author Stephen Kotkin, Kotkin, is interviewed about the subject, because he will pull you in with his words, and then buy one of Stephen Kotkin's books about Stalin. Or you could do the same thing with an author like Robert Service, who is another excellent author on the period. I prefer Cockin myself, but yeah, and you've even got, I think, Stephen Beaver has, and I don't think I've got the name wrong. Anthony Beaver, there we go. Has recently released a book. He wrote the I guess, absolute classic on Stalingrad. Recently released a Russian Revolution book. I've not read it yet, but I hear it's very good. But yeah, you're getting into my territory now when talking about history. I'm not terribly disposed towards military history. That can bore me stiff. But political history is something that often grabs me. DP says, beyond the existing Chronicles of Darkness and World of Darkness lines and supplements, do you think there is a kind of supernatural creature splat that hasn't been written on that would interest you? Well, it's difficult to say now, DP, because Chronicles of Darkness really was expansive. I mean, people do like to say aliens, sort of body snatchers and so on. They've been explored to a minimal degree in Mummy and will be explored further in Book of Lasting Death. But outside of that realm, I think Chronicles of Darkness has plumbed the depths of everything potentially interesting for that group of games. I think, if you go much farther off the page of classic horror, you really start to narrow your potential audience down to, well, who here wants to play a creature of the Black Lagoon? And already I could say, well, that character could fit into Beast the Primordial. Or definitely They Came from Beneath the Sea. So right now, there is no splat that hasn't been written that would interest me, because I think the World of Darkness and Chronicles of Darkness do a very good job. And I would be interested to see a different take on those same splats more. I would like to see vampires and shapeshifters and witches or warlocks or sorcerers or whatever presented in a different way to how I've seen them before, rather than trying to come up with something new. New monster. Thank you very much, Stefan, for tuning in, and good evening, Simon. Glad you could join us. We've maintained a good number of people passing in and out. I mean, I've nearly passed out several times. Bro Meliad says, Guten Abend, Englander scum. Seeing as you're fond of history, what is the most delicious, intriguing, horrifying, hilarious food recipe you've encountered while while researching? That didn't go where I thought it would. What's the most interesting recipe? That is a very good question. Obviously, everyone likes the, what is it, 7 birds served at a banquet, where you start off with, I think it's a goose, and you stuff a turkey in the goose and a chicken in the turkey, and go all the way down to, I think, a quail or a duckling. I'm not culinary enough to come up with something like that. So I've never really studied the history of bizarre recipes, the sort of Mrs. Beecham's book for bored housewives, as it used to be. So unfortunately, I'm going to have to disappoint you there. Simon says, seeing as you also have a fondness for H.P. Lovecraft, well, let's not take it too far. I don't like H.P. Lovecraft, although I do appreciate some of his work. Do you know of his story, The Shadow Out of Time, and if there are any games similar to such a story? You know what? That isn't one that immediately rings a bell. Oh, yeah, you can boo me if you want, bro. Shadow Out of Time. I've got the complete Necronomicon, the original, but that name is not jumping out at me. How stupid! How silly of me. Well, I'm terribly sorry, Simon. I'm really letting people down on the question front now. Velvet CK says, tasting history is a great channel for fun historical recipes. There you go. You've saved my ass, Velvet. Caravolos says, how come Tenebration and Necromancy were merged in V5 feels like a very awkward mix to me for a variety of reasons. That's because it was my choice to do so. That's right. I'll take the responsibility for mixing of Tenebration and Necromancy. Me. I will. When myself and Karim Amar at Paradox, because I suggested it. and it was decided this is a good idea, and I regret nothing. I regret nothing of making Oblivion its own power, and if you don't like it, I'm very sorry that that disappoints you. I'm clearly not. So why were they merged? Okay, so there's a few reasons. One, and this is a very simple one, is we didn't feel any clan should have unique access to one discipline. So if Obtenebration stayed, La Sombra would have been the only clan with access to it. Wouldn't have made a great deal of sense, given that we'd already got rid of Serpentis and Quietus. 2, the merging... This goes back to something that was originally looked at when I started working on V5. So bear in mind, things may have changed. But back then, there was this thing called One World of Darkness. You may have remembered it, you may have forgotten it. And it was called One World of Darkness because the entire thing was going to be presented as effectively crossover compatible. Werewolves would interact with vampires, vampires would interact with mages, and so there was an idea from a sort of meta plot standpoint, a meta universe standpoint, that things had to make sense. It didn't make sense to have the abyss of La Sombra lore and the underworld, Labyrinth, Malpheus, whatever, be distinct. They are all Oblivion. And so necromancy pulls from Oblivion, obtenebration pulls from Oblivion. Put them together, you get the Oblivion discipline. So it makes sense from a meta narrative perspective. And is there a third option? Is there a third reason for it? No. I mean, the problem that came up when developing the Cults of the Blood Gods was the fact that if you had the Giovanni as they were presented in previous editions, their disciplines would have been Dominate, Potence, and Oblivion, and that Sombra were also Dominate, Potence, and Oblivion. So that's why we reset the discipline array to Cappadocian, but maintain the Giovanni Bite Curse. So there you go. There's a bit of insight there for you on the World of Darkness. I mean, it's not Trinity Continuum Aether, but if you haven't backed that yet, my God, we've passed an hour. If you're not backed Aether yet on Kickstarter, now is a good time to do so. Plus, if you do so and you comment on that Kickstarter right now, or while this video is going on, comment on the Kickstarter, Matthew Dawkins sent me here. Or if you prefer, the Gentleman Gamer sent me here. Why would you comment that, I wonder? Why would you do that? Do I get anything for it? No, I get nothing. I don't get commission. I don't get any kind of bonus. If you want to send me commission, go on MatthewDawkins.com, buy me a cup of tea. You can do it through the website. No. What you do if you comment on the Kickstarter that you've backed Aether based on this video, based on my talking to you, is you tell me that these videos are actually effective. Because if they're not, there's not much point to my doing them. I mean, I love talking to you, believe me, but there's also a cost to my time. And part of that is I want this Kickstarter to do well. So check out the Kickstarter, back it for $5, back it for $20, back it for a PDF, back it for a hard copy. Do whatever you can to support it, share it, shout it off the rooftops, but comment on there that you came there as a result of me, and I will know. So that means these videos are worthwhile. Jamie says, hey, I'm quite new to storytelling and running a Requiem game, and a player is interested in joining the Ordo Dracul, and I'm wondering if you know any good resources for tests and so on they could perform. Yeah, I mean, it's a first edition Requiem book, but it's called Ordo Dracul. There's also Secrets of the Covenants for Requiem second edition, which I think has some of these kinds of trials that you can join in on. To sort of pass the test. I'm trying to think. There was a game book I wrote with all kinds of initiation ceremonies. It was in V20 True Black Hand. I don't think I've still got a copy of that. No, I must have sold it. That had loads of initiation rites and ceremonies to join the True Black Hand. But I remember Ordo Dracul for first edition Requiem had a lot of that stuff. And I think Secrets of the Covenants does too for second edition. So do check them out. James Ellsbury says, related to the idea of reinterpreting World of Darkness games, which changeling setting do I prefer? So do I prefer Changeling 20 or do I prefer Changeling the Lost? Well, I mean, I could be biased here. As the World of Darkness overseer, in-house developer, I would say Changing the Dreaming. Plus, I worked on the Changing the Dreaming 20th Anniversary Edition book. But in truth, Changing the Lost is the one that grabs me the most, and I think it has a purer approach to horror. Changing the Dreaming is a fantastic game with a brilliant setting, but I think that its setting muddles people a little when they're used to playing the horror of vampire or werewolf, perhaps wraith. I think if you get into Changing the Dreaming if you play Mage the Ascension, you will enjoy Changing the Dreaming often. But if you are a diehard vampire player, you may look askance at it and feel more comfortable with Changing the Lost. Caravalos says, boo. Oh, I'm being booed from all quarters at this point. Emerald Coast Arch says, I'm running a modern game set in Lovecraft's Arkham, Massachusetts. The game involves the Fae, but I'm having trouble portraying fairies as kinds of eldritch horrors. Any help is appreciated. Best way to do that, Emerald Coast Archer, is to present your Fae as perfect, as Stepford Wivesian, as having a shine to their skin, but they never blink, as doing everything absolutely fine and almost robotically because they are not comfortable in this human fashion. And then they do something absolutely alien and horrific without as much as batting an eyelid or showing that this is disturbing to them, because Fae, I think, work best in that Changing the Lost vein when they are uncanny, slightly off of human. They want to blend in, but they are not like us at all. So there's a bit of a doppelganger sense to them that I really enjoy. Let's see. The Shadow Out of Time is the story of the alien race which has conquered time, are historians, and they take over the minds of intellectuals from every decade and world and record the period. That sounds familiar. No, to disappoint you, I can't recall any particular Call of Cthulhu scenario that has, I think it's the Great Race. Is it the Great Race? Yithians? Maybe those historians they later get described as in that sense. I mean, you could do it with Aether because there's time travel. You're going to have Morlocks. You're going to have the H.G. Wells time machine side of things. So that actually works out really well. I remember when I worked on Cold War Cthulhu, or World War Cthulhu, Cold War, the full title, I wrote a scenario for one of the books. It's called Covert Actions, and it has a time-traveling creature in that is basically inhabiting bodies. And I won't ruin it in case you ever play it, but that kind of dabbles in it. So I'm amazed I forgot the Shadow Out of Time. But no, none of the epic length Call of Cthulhu scenarios like Horror on the Orient Express or Masks of Nyarlathotep or similar have explored that, as far as I know. Velvet Tea Cake says, ever since you mentioned weaving the Russian Revolution into parts of V5, I keep thinking of Malenkov from the Sacrifice of Red Moon role-playing in Chicago by Night. Yep, Malenkov is in Chicago by Night because Malenkov was one of, I guess, if you were feeling unkind, Stalin's henchmen. Probably found more prominence through the movie The Death of Stalin than anything he did historically, though he was the leader of the Soviet Union for a brief time. That is where Malenkov comes from. Or at least the name Malenkov. The character is definitely more a Rasputin crossed with... who did we mix Rasputin with? Is it Vitores Mendez, the cult village leader in Resident Evil 4, was who I based him off visually. I always have a fair amount of input. By a fair amount, I mean controlling influence over the books I develop. So sometimes authors end up dismayed to find things I've changed, although generally I can justify why. No one has ever screamed at me or cried, why did you kill my creation? sometimes something will be presented in a way that I think, well, that's good, but what it could do with is a great big bald domed head and a tangled long beard and basically be shambling around with like Rasputin with two cultists at his side, and then you end up with Malenkov that's in Chicago by Night instead of, just sort of cold, straight-faced psychopath. Tal says, how do you approach trying to challenge a group that works really well together in your game without being too heavy-handed? Had a DM friend struggle with this in his games all the time. So how do I challenge people that really work well together? Well, I find it quite a simple thing. You need to break the group up occasionally. And I don't think this is something that should be poo-pooed. I think this is something that should be encouraged. I hate this idea of don't split the party. Groups shouldn't walk around attached at the hip to each other. It completely voids the opportunity for role play. You need every opportunity to let characters stand out on their own. Now, sometimes they can do that from a group setting, but often they need a solo piece, which does mean there needs to be some buy-in from the players to act as an audience, hopefully a participating one. And I would suggest that if the players are a really finely tuned group that work well together like a machine, they are going to support each other. It gives players a chance to show off, spotlight, do whatever they like, and gives their characters a chance for growth outside of the unit. There are some games where it's harder than others. D&D has a certain expectation that the group is constantly going to move around as a block. Werewolf the Apocalypse has the same thing. And there are other games like that too. But if you take a game like Alien, which we were speaking about earlier, if your group is constantly wandering around as a block, you've completely diminished the horror. The alien will probably still kill all of them, but there's no great horror to being killed as a group. You need to be picked off one at a time. And I think it's the same for a group that just functions really well together. You're not breaking them up to sets to trap them, to trick them, but you are breaking them up to test their characters in different ways to make them push their usual limits. Angel Garcia says, the Oblivion discipline is one of my favorite V5 related decisions, and I say that as a La Sombra fan. Good for you, Angel. Caravalos is about to come in with something different, however. Wouldn't it have made more sense then to make it so that the La Sombra have unique powers within Oblivion and Hecata their own? If you want to get creative, maybe a few neutral powers in between for both. They do. If you're playing a La Sombra, only pick the ones that you think match you. If you're a Hecata, only pick the powers that match you. It is as simple as that. I think it is far healthier in a game to offer suggestions for what you can do than to prescribe that you have to pick these powers. So if you want to play a La Sombra that's interested in the necromantic side of Oblivion, go for it. But there may be other La Sombra who look at you a bit strangely, treat you a bit strangely. That leads to character development. Or it means you are a La Sombra that has good connections with the Hecata. Conversely, if you're a Hecata that isn't interested in necromancy but is interested in manipulating shadows, your clan is going to have a use for you, but they may not invite you to the top table for dinner. So you've got the whole range of powers there, just the same as if I'm playing a wizard in D&D, I've got access to all of the spell schools, but if I want to be an invoker, I'm going to be leaning more on using fireballs and magic missiles than I am on whatever the alternatives are. Simon says, you get some clout, man. I should. Garavola says, necromancy, La Sombra, and Tenebration Hecata just feels off to me. Mind I speak for no one else. No, you are perfectly entitled to your opinion. And yeah, they do feel off. They should feel off. But that doesn't mean they don't exist. And that is where the fun lies. Characters should, and this is going to be a controversial statement, I know, characters should be snowflakes. Characters should stand out. They should be interesting. Because if they're not, why are you playing them? Why are they the protagonists in a story? So if you want to play a member of an unusual bloodline and have a great reason to do so, do it. That's why they are there in the game. I cannot stand sidebars in books that say this bloodline isn't really meant for the players. If you play them, you're disrupting the game. Or why present them in the first place? Playable options should be there to entice people to want to play the game. You never know what someone is going to feel attached to. I remember when I first read Guide to the Sabbats, whatever edition it was, and saw the Kia Sheed for the first time and thought, wow, Fey vampires. I love this idea of, much as I was saying earlier about Fae, really detached, weird vampires, weirdlings with overly long fingers, stretched out frames, wearing long coats, broad hats, completely pitch black eyes, who think that skin is a dirty transmitter of disease, so I will drink through a silver straw that I will use to puncture my victim like a mosquito's proboscis. I liked that kind of stuff because it stood out to me, it inspired me creatively. I absolutely see why a new storyteller would say, well, play a Ventru stockbroker, well, play a Bruja biker, well, play a Toreador fashion model, or whatever. And that works. It does work. And some people will gravitate it, but some people will gravitate toward Tutti Frutti ice cream instead of vanilla. So, you know, there's lots of flavors available. And if you want to play a La Sombra that has necromantic powers, I say go for it. It will create a very interesting character. But if you don't. And it will also create an interesting character if you have an interesting character in mind. And if the La Sombra have been completely ruined by having access to Oblivion, don't play a La Sombra. There's lots of other playable options. Night greetings to Transylvania Andre. Jamie says, thank you for the answer, Matthew. Thank you for the question, Jamie. I can't remember what it was. Cecilia says, you're very handsome, sir. Well, thank you very much. You know, I do try. Simon says, by the way, I'm unsure if you had anything to do with Swan Song, but having completed it multiple times, if you were involved, good job, man. It was a very enjoyable story. I was involved in Swan Song, as I showed in the last video. This is the little blood-soaked swan I got from attending the launch party. It was great. Great fun. I've got the game of it, the PC game, on a disc somewhere. Why I've got it on a disc, I do not know. I got a free copy, I guess, and I don't have an Xbox or a PlayStation, so my options were limited. And I don't have a disc drive on my PC, but it's all right. I played it during development. Martin says, I didn't know that you were streaming too. Awesome. It is awesome, isn't it? Wonderful to be here. Tal says, don't forget to mention this stream sponsor, Magadon Pharmaceutical. No, this stream sponsor is Trinity Continuum Aether. If you haven't backed it yet and you haven't commented that I sent you to do so, please consider doing so. It's a great pleasure of mine to be able to develop role-playing games, write for role-playing games now as a full-time job. It's not always the most lucrative form of income, but it is definitely rewarding. It is in many ways a dream come true. And I wouldn't be able to do that without the support of people who buy my games and watch these videos and constantly tell me how handsome I am. So I do say to you, if you like my work, if you enjoy the things I have to say, the thoughts I put onto paper, then please do consider backing Aether, even if it's only for $5 to access the manuscript. Your support is hugely appreciated, not just by me, but by everyone at Onyx Path. Bro says, always split the party. Dr. Hyde says, are you ever going to do the Pentex Guide to the Pharaoh? Well, as I did the Pentex Guide to Werewolves about 10 years ago now, I don't think it's going to happen. I would, I suppose, if someone backed on the Patreon, my Patreon, patreon.com, Matthew Dawkins, which there's a level on the Patreon that allows you to commission videos. But the thing is, and speaking perfectly candidly, when I used to make those videos prolifically, I was in a job that gave me an awful lot of free time. I mean, it was still a full-time job, but I didn't have much of a life. And so I made an awful lot of videos in my spare time. I enjoyed doing it. I enjoyed spending my spare time doing it. It was a hobby. And now I have a job that takes up a lot more of my time, and I have a life that takes up a lot more of my time. I certainly have a lot more obligations. And that means if I'm going to spend the time making a video series, I do need to be compensated to do so. And so, yeah, if you want to see the Pentex Guide to the Pharaoh seriously, go on patreon.com/Matthew Dawkins, send me a small contribution, or go on matthewdawkins.com to do it, and we'll see what we can do. Simon says, are there any plans regarding writing any Vampire the Masquerade or World of Darkness story novels? I've recently been reading, oh God, Masquerade of the Red Death. I appreciate they were your entry point into the World of Darkness. I think they were for a lot of people. I wouldn't say it was necessarily a fantastic series. Some people love it. There's been micro-fiction novellas and like being released for Vampire the Masquerade quite a lot in the last few years. I know one of them, I think, was by Cassandra Shaw, I think. I've released 3 novellas for Masquerade. They were released on the Swansong website. One covers the story of Galeb, one covers the story of Emem, one of them covers the story of Hazel Iverson. So this is all running up to the course of Swansong. So yeah, there are stories out there. I don't know if you will ever see paperback and vampire novels on the bookshelves before, because that industry is not what it was in the 90s. And as you just said, pure nostalgia, but I still miss novels being released. Martin says, I need to bring more group dynamic because I have a new Ventru player. Oh, well, don't let them dominate everyone. Splitting up is no problem. A La Sombra with Necromancy is goth as fuck. Thank you, DP. Loki's Run says, as a Cappadocian stan, notice I say Cappadocian. It's a deliberate correction on my part. Because in the era when Cappadocia would have been called Cappadocia, people didn't use soft C's, and therefore it would have been Cappadocian. As a Cappadocian stan, I love the family reunion. Did you ever have any reservations about weaving that into the vampire meta plot? Apologies if there's been asked already. It hasn't been asked already, Loki. And no, I had no reservations whatsoever, because that was my raison d'etre for working in Vampire in the first place. All the big secrets come out now. I mean, I think most people are aware that I've often said my favorite clan is Nosferatu or Ravnos or Malkavian or whoever, but the one I often gravitate toward is the Cappadocians, Harbingers, Giovanni. I love the Clan of Death, and the reason isn't because I think that they were terribly well written, although there were wonderful bits. It's because my entry into the meta plot of Vampire the Masquerade was through the Giovanni Chronicles, and so I immediately had the idea that the Cappadocians were special. And when you, as a reader, identify the Salubri as special, the Cappadocians as special, or whatever as your special pick, you identify with them, you form an attachment to them. And that went on. Obviously, my narrator in The Gentleman's Guide to Vampires turned out to be a Harbinger of Skulls, or Cappadocian. And through every book I wrote on for V20 where I could, there was an advancement or expansion of the Cappadocian and Harbinger's metaplot. I put that stuff in Lore of the Bloodlines, Beckett's Jihad Diary, of course, Tome of Secrets, V20 Dark Ages Companion. Did I put it? Oh, and of course, V20 True Black Hand. So yeah, lots of the books I worked on. I think it even appears in the Book of the Worm, come to think of it, maybe. For Werewolf 20, because I like to seed these things, and it isn't just me being a fan. I like to provide connectivities, loads of interesting meta plot things. This is why Beckett's Jihad Diary, I think, is probably the Vampire World of Darkness book that I can hold up as my proudest co-achievement, because this is me dumping all of that meta plot knowledge. Anyway. When it comes to V5, it was always my ambition going into V5 that I would remake the Clan of Death, that they would not be the Giovanni anymore, that they would be what became the Hecata. And I therefore drove the clan towards that through books like Beckett's Jihad Diary. There's chapters in there dedicated to what becomes the family reunion. And so ultimately I got to do that with Cults of the Blood Gods, and no hesitation whatsoever. This is what I wanted from the Clan of Death. This is the evolution of the Clan of Death I wanted. I established things like the masks, the many faces of death, a capuchin in previous books. So it all came to a beautiful head in Cults of the Blood Gods, and I'm very happy with it. No regrets there whatsoever. Obviously, sometimes I will get this diehard Giovanni fan write to me saying, you ruined my favorite clan. To that, I say, I'm sorry. However, look at the Hecata. Now tell me you can't play your Giovanni as a part of the Hecata. And they can't, because the Giovanni family structure still exists. Now, however, the Hecata provides you the opportunity to play a Giovanni, a Cappadocian, a Harbinger, a Samdi, or whatever in the modern era with a family clan structure that is sort of semi-clan, semi-sect. And I have never heard of more people playing members of the Clan of Death since the Hecata were formed. Honestly, I think it reinvigorated the clan, much as the Ministry did for the followers of Set. I know I've said it before. Up until the V5 Companion, I wrote all of the clans for V5. So all of the clans in the core book, Camarilla, Anarch, Chicago, Cults of the Blood Gods, that's my work. And I don't say that as a brag or a boast. I say that because, yeah, you can place any of that stuff, the Tremere fracturing, the Bruja, going full Anarch, Theobel blowing Hardstadt away. You can put all of that down at my feet. Obviously, it had to be approved by White Wolf, became Paradox. But this was all part of my vision for what the clans would become in V5. And I feel like all of them have become more accessible and more interesting, because of course I think that. I wrote it. If I didn't think that, I wouldn't have written them that way. I certainly didn't write any of them to get worse. So yeah, blame me if you like, or celebrate me. I don't mind. If you really want to celebrate me, go on MatthewDawkins.com, send me some money. Alternatively, if you want to get something for your money that isn't just me telling you how fantastic I am, go on the Aether Kickstarter for Trinity Continuum Aether and back that book, because I developed it, and if you like my work, you will enjoy it. So, what else do we have here? Simon Veneer says, is it possible to just donate directly to you rather than the Kickstarter? Yeah, sure. I mean, you can go on Patreon to get something for it. So playing a game, that kind of thing. Go on patreon.com/Matthew Dawkins. But if you literally just want to send me cash, go on MatthewDawkins.com. There is a button on one of the pages, there's only about 5 pages on the site, where you can buy me a cup of tea. Links to my PayPal. You can send me as much or as little as you like, and whatever you send is hugely appreciated. It really is. And thank you for asking. Grant says, if you were to create a World of Darkness, New World of Darkness Chronicle based on Hollow Knight, Silk Song, which system would you use? Well, Hollow Knight doesn't really fit within either the World of Darkness or Chronicles of Darkness, does it? Because you're playing bugs in a subterranean world. So I don't know. None of them really work, I'm afraid. It's a game about hitting bugs with a needle. A nail, I should say. No, it doesn't work. I mean, the world below is going to be your closest approximation, because we are using an awful lot of Hollow Knights. Well, we're certainly inspired by Hollow Knight. I can say that for myself as the developer and the person that came up with the world below, because I love Hollow Knight. But I don't really see it layering over World of Darkness, not in the same way BioShock did when I wrote the BioShock RPG. The BioShock RPG. When I wrote a BioShock RPG using the Vampire the Requiem system, that made sense. Caravolos says, ever had a player get tired of their character in the middle of the game, and if so, how do you deal with it? Especially if you've been working on weaving said characters into the plot. Yes, I have actually come to think of it, thinking way back when into Pathfinder. And it was actually quite frustrating because, yes, I had written an awful lot of plot that related to this character entirely, but the player decided, I don't want to play this character anymore, I'm bored of them. And we had a chat about it. We had a break in the middle of the session, spoke about what they wanted to do, and the best way to handle it was saying, well, play the character through to the end of this session, and we will think of an elegant exit for that character in the beginning of the next session, by which point you would already written a new character that you can then jump in and play. That's the best way to do it. There's no point arbitrarily killing off a character, because that's not fun. And to be honest, game sessions rarely last so long that someone can't put up with playing a boring character for an hour or two. I mean, if they have only just come to the decision halfway through a session, I don't want to play this character anymore, and they genuinely can't play that character anymore, rather than disrupt the game for everyone else, what I would suggest is you say, okay, well, why don't you take a break away from the table, have this book, think up your next character, we'll say your character's off doing something, and leave it at that. That may sound a bit callous or cold, but to be honest, I need to care for the needs of the entire group, rather than a player who has decided 1.5 hours in, I don't want to play this this guy anymore, you know? You Dream says, do you also develop material for V5? I'm sorry, it was a very silly question. Yeah, I developed an awful lot of books for Vampire the Masquerade 5th edition. I developed Chicago by Night, Cults of the Blood Gods, Let the Streets Run Red, Chicago Folios, Trails of Ash and Bone, co-developed Forbidden Religions, Children of the Blood. I wrote on V5, Camarilla, Anarch. I wrote the Rusted Veins playtest. I wrote Boston and developed Boston by Night. I've written for Vampire the Masquerade Heritage, the board game, written for the Blood Feud board game, written for Chapters, the board game, did some work on Rivals as well. So yeah, I've done a lot of V5-centric work, and that is probably why I'm not doing it right now, because I have written an awful lot of Vampire the Masquerade in the last few years. I do love the property, but I also sometimes need a break from it. Simon says, thanks for answering the novels question. I bought them all, but wish there was a specific location I would check to see if there were novels to buy. There is. If you go on drivethroughfiction.com, you should be able to type in Vampire the Masquerade, and you should be able to find them on there. Give that a go. Dr. Hyde says, do you think the 5th edition vampire mechanics taking much from Requiem? Lots of vampire questions right now. Where are all the Aether questions at? Anyway, do I think the 5th edition vampire mechanics taking much from Requiem has limited disciplines with amalgam powers for clans like the Zimishi instead of just having vicissitude as its own power? Yeah, I'm in favor of that because I was part of the design decision that decided that. It wasn't just me that wanted to take Masquerade, base it on Requiem. I wasn't part of that initial decision. And it isn't based exclusively on Requiem, don't get me wrong, but there was absolutely no reason for Paradox to not take inspiration from another game that did something mechanically better in a subjective sense than Masquerade. So this is why touchstones get pulled over. This is why blood potency. This is why, as you say, disciplines get changed up a bit, because Requiem handled it better at a system level. Again, subjective, I know, but this was the decision of the design team, and so yeah, I'm in favor of it. That said, I completely see the appeal of having unique disciplines, although it does render some clans generic and some clans unique, and I think that poses a different raft of problems. All that said, which vampire game do I run more? I run V20. Because I find that system in general more accessible to the vast majority of players than V5. I think V5 is perfectly fine. It does its job really well. Again, I wouldn't have written that material if I didn't think it was good. But I still think that V20 is the, if not the most, if not the tightest, if not the most balanced, if not the most well-refined, whatever you want to say, system, I do think it's the most accessible system for Vampire. When will we have the Kirsheed in V5, says You Dream? I would have added them already if I had had my way, but I pitched a book which was all about mutations of the blood, which would have had your Bloodlines in, Kirsheed, and the rest. Some of them at least, and there would have been a V5 source book, a sizable one, but sadly never got picked up. So I don't know. I think they've appeared in multiple Storytellers Vault books by this point. Martin says, I like the old versions of vampires more because I like the structures and that players, when they get older, have many interesting problem situations. New time is like already lived in it. Yeah, I see that. Quelia says, I have sort of fallen back in love with Zimishi since the rewrites. A good work there. They feel so much more playable to me. I realize this is controversial. It's not so bad. I mean, I didn't have anything to do with Zimishi. Like I said, my involvement stopped up to V5 Companion. I didn't work on V5 Companion, Second Inquisition. What else has come out for Vampire? Is that it? Either way, I didn't do the Salubri, Ravnos, or Zimishi, so I can't take the credit for them. But I'm glad you like them, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with liking one edition over the other, as long as you're not shitting on the edition you don't like. That's where things get a bit crass and unnecessary. Simon says, it might be a bad question. I mean, no offense asking, but is Beckett's Jihad Diary still relevant as a recommended catch-up introduction to newish people? I would say so, Simon. I mean, I pour a lot of love into that. It's a really good way of catching up with the meta plot, but there's a lot of information in there. The good news is it's perfectly well paired with the White Wolf wiki, maintained by Ian A.A. Watson of Onyx Path. So what that means is if you come upon a character or an event and you don't recognize it, you just go on the White Wolf wiki. It's a bit like doing some really fun research at a library, but instead of having to pull loads of books off the shelves, you have the White Wolf wiki in one monitor, you have Beckett's Jihad Diary on the other, or you're reading it. Occasionally you get something and you don't know, I want to find out more about this character. Type it on the wiki, look it up. Oh, that's interesting. So it's a good central place, I think. Agent of Chaos says, if you wrote that the clans for V5, why have the Lasombra turncoat to the Camarilla? The Friends of the Night just handing over cardinals unless they plan to destroy the Camarilla, asks Agent of Chaos. Well, part of the reason is because clans don't exist as such in the Sabbat in V5. That's the other V5 book that's come out, of course, that I didn't work on. So it wouldn't have made much sense for the Lasombra to be exclusively Sabbat, no more than the Zimishi are exclusively Sabbat at this point. Plus, the Lasombra, I mean, it's all written in Chicago by Night. Why did the Lasombra defect? Well, there's lots of individual reasons, but the Lasombra were involved in the Sabbat Crusade in North Africa. The survivors of that crusade went back to their elders of the Friends of the Night, described the kinds of horrors they saw there, and the Friends of the Night, who are pragmatists before anything else, decided, shit, we're actually on the losing side. Now, this tells us something interesting, in my view, about Lasombra philosophy, if a clan can be said to have one. The Ventru are about rule, are about dominance. The Lasombra are about victory. If they don't feel like victory is within their grasp, then they will turn sides. They have no loyalty, no love for the Zimishi. They're, as I say, they're pragmatists. And so they send a number of envoys to various members of the Camarilla, high up Camarilla, saying, we want membership. What's it going to cost? Because the Lasombra have no loyalty to their own clan either. They are pragmatists. They are bloody-minded. Hell, you could call them Darwinist. When the Camarilla starts saying, yeah, okay, you need to sacrifice some of your cardinals, the Lasombra, who are making the decisions, who aren't all cardinals, the cardinals are the ones who are still devoted to the Sabbat, they think, okay, we'll hand them over if that guarantees our safety. And you know what? We're so arrogant and so full of our own self-ability that we will take over this sect sooner or later because we're far more competent than the Ventru or Torrid or whatever be. And so there's lots of reasons why the Lasombra move over, but it's an individual decision. It's we never describe that the whole clan moves. I think someone mooted at some point. It's probably about 50-50. Some of them even joined the Anarchs. We're not supposed to know exactly how many. What Chicago by Night does is present the opportunity to play a Camarilla Lasombra as a relatively normal thing. And that's the point, because the vast majority of vampire games are Camarilla or Anarch. They are not Sabbat. And so restricting a fun, well-loved clan to being Sabbat is not very good game design in this modern era. Again, subjective. Loki says, I see you will be at Tabletop Scotland. Have you managed to go to any cons since COVID hit, or will this be your first one? This will be my first one since the pandemic. I have not attended UK Games Expo, Dragon Meet, or any of the other smaller ones, and I'm certainly not attending Gen Con this weekend. Mouse Lord says, what's your favourite tea? My favourite tea? That's a good question. I mean, the one I'm most likely to drink regularly is just going to be breakfast tea or maybe Earl Grey, but my favourite tea is a chocolate and mint tea by a company called Tea Pigs. Adam Brown says, hello, mate. I've been watching your videos since the early days. Crossed Mars, Shadowrun, Traffic Jam, Wraith Streams. Good God. And I've always wondered who your favourite authors are. My favourite authors, novel-wise, are... I always used to cite, and I suppose I still should, the 3 Js for me. Jane Austen, James Joyce, J.G. Ballard. For different reasons. Jane Austen is a fantastic character writer. Don't think that just because her novels are old that her stories aren't fantastic, because they are, and they're driven by really great, incredibly well-written characters that have inspired me over the years. James Joyce is the opposite, really shit at writing characters in my view, but fantastic at describing scenes, exposition, the depths of dialogue, of description in James Joyce put H.P. Lovecraft's many adjectives to shame. And then you've got J.G. Ballard, who for me is has the best vision out of any of those authors, out of any of my favorite fiction authors, for speculative fiction, dystopia, sci-fi, horror. Just gets it bang on. What I like out of fiction is what J.G. Ballard delivers in fiction. It is rare for me to find a J.G. Ballard book that I just don't love. Maybe, that's actually a good question. Empire of the Sun isn't my favorite, but that's because it's so unlike all of his others. It's semi-autobiographical, but novels like High Rise, which I often cite, Crash, Concrete Island, Cocaine Nights, his sheer array of short stories. His short stories are there, should be checked out. If you like Love, Death and Robots on Netflix, you probably would have seen the giant, the one about the giant who just washes up on the shore like a whale. That's a J.G. Ballard story, and that's one of his more subdued ones, but it's again so well written, and the dialogue in that short film for Love, Death and Robots is pulled line for line from the written work. So yeah, those are my favorite authors of fiction. And thank you for supporting me for so long, Adam. Martin, what do I think about Wealth the Apocalypse Earthblood in accordance to the fluff? So I did do some minor writing on Earthblood. I've yet to play it, however. I'm just not a big fan of sort of run hack slash games, so that's not a comment on its quality, although I know a lot of people had problems with it. So yeah, I do know that it took some, I wouldn't say it took some liberties, it took some fresh approaches to Werewolf that have made people think, oh, is that the way Werewolf the Apocalypse 5th edition is going to look? And in many cases, the answer is yes. I don't know a great deal about Werewolf 5 because I'm not on it. I was on it, but I'm not anymore. I was on it when it was a Renegade project, but it's now a Paradox in-house project. So I don't know how much of it is going to be accurate, but I'm still running Werewolf the Wild West using W20, and that's unlikely to change in the near future. Adam says, your Lovecraftian take on A Christmas Carol was brilliant. Thank you very much for that. Not many people have ever spoken to me about that. It's one of my favorite old videos. Tal says, I was wondering in Aether if creating a character reverse engineering Martian tech as a squire perhaps would work, maybe have some fun explosive failures while learning to do so while I'm at it. Yes, that is exactly what you should do. And what's more, there's loads of Martian weapons, entanglements, and snares that are going to be outlined in some of the chapters that get released during the course of the Kickstarter. So yeah, I think turning them around and into weapons you can use against Martians and other Aeternauts is definitely something a squire could do. Michael Holbrook says, any actual play podcast you can recommend of equal quality to Red Moon role-playing? Oh, there's so few that are of equal quality to Red Moon role-playing. Queen's Court Games is really good, however, so I will give them a shout-out. Any actual play run or involving Hiromi Kota, one of my frequent collaborators, is a mark of quality because Hiromi doesn't play bad games and is a fantastic player and GM. So recommend them. And also, what else would I go for? If you are interested in Chronicles of Darkness, check out Occultists Anonymous, because they've been running a brilliant Mage the Awakening game you should look up. Bro says, I'm a complete newcomer to Aether, but expecting my core and expansion through the Kickstarter. Are there any fun toys for characters you can hype about? Yeah, let's have a look at the gift list. For those of you who are interested in Aether, let's look at a Magog power now. Let's go for Dynamo, because I'm in the mood for Dynamo. So for this one, you need Stamina 2. She knew her companions could make it to the portal if she could only buy them some time. As the band of Morlocks entered the cavern, she activated her Faraday belt. Go, she called to her allies as bolts of electricity danced across her body. I can hold them off. This is actually a Gog and Magog power. System. By converting Aether into base electricity, your character can surround themselves with a protective energy field. Spend an inspiration as a reflexive action. A field of electricity surrounds the character, granting soft armor equal to the reflective facet. Now, this is important. The character may purchase additional armor tags from among complete environmental hard armor tags up to their intuitive facet. In addition to its defensive properties, this field is dangerous to others, dealing indirect contact damage equal to your character's destructive facet. So I go into this a bit, and this is where the powers in Aether really sort of explode in scope. Because as your facets grow more and more powerful, your powers are going to grow more and more powerful to a ridiculous degree. Absolutely ridiculous. And it's great fun with it. Now, this is an interesting power because it's accessible to both Gogs and Magogs. So, yeah, you can surround yourself with an electric field. Why the hell not? But there's also loads of gadgets, I think we've got vehicles in there as well. We've got a lot of fun stuff in Aether for characters. Whether you're playing a Squire, a Gog, or a Magog, you can, of course, create Aether gates, pass through to new dimensions, travel in time, travel across the world. There's an awful lot you can do in Aether. Sorry about that. I've been talking a lot. Simon. I wonder if my drink is leaking or if I'm dribbling. Simon says, I've recently been running a campaign with a friend who is a historian and teacher in the Middle Ages, and it was a great success at the game club. Does the thingy where players can submit their story for others to play still exist, and what is the name? Yeah, you can still submit stories for others to play in. If it's for something like They Came From or Trinity, you can use the story path Nexus and basically upload your story and other people can play it. If it's for World of Darkness or Chronicles of Darkness, use the Storyteller's Vault. If it's for a game like Scarred Lands, Sluresian Vault. If it's for Pugmire, use Canis Minor. There's lots of community content programs. Carabolos says goodbye. Simon is still talking about the game here. Oh, okay. Wow, there's actually a lot of text here, so I'm going to allow others to read it, Simon. I'm going to have to depart soon. I've nearly been running this for 2 hours, and some of you have remained tuned in for the whole damn thing. So I hope to see that some of you are back Trinity Continuum Aether, because if you haven't, well, this isn't going to happen again. Rick Reed says, I've been watching that since that Subway Simulator review. I actually checked that out recently. It came up in my recommended viewing, my London Underground Simulator Let's Play, and I saw that someone had commented alarmingly. I remember seeing this video when I was 8 years old and thinking it was hilarious. Now I'm an adult, I found it again, and it's still funny. And I checked the date that I uploaded it, and it's over 10 years old. I thought, oh my God. There are people who see my videos as nostalgia. There are people who have watched my videos when they were children and are now adults. That is a disturbing truth to realize. Okay, so let's see. Fangs says, do you know if when V5 originally launched, anyone had the slightest idea what Sabat were going to be about, or was that to be determined? I think Paradox had a fair view. I mean, it wasn't... I certainly knew some of what was going to happen, but Nothing is ever set in stone until the book is written, and I wasn't on that book. So it's not how I would present the Sabbat. It's not how I use the Sabbat in my Masquerade games. But, there's plenty of opportunities to change it, to ignore it, to use previous editions material. God knows I do. The thing is, the mechanical side of V5 Sabbat is pretty limited, and I don't mean that as a criticism. I mean that in the sense that if you want to have the Sabbat be as the Sabbat are in V20 and all prior editions, all you need to do is use the mechanics from the core book and all the various disciplines that have already been presented. That's pretty much it. That's all you need to do. So your limitations are, and I hate to sound reductive, your imagination. The books exist. Just because they're for previous edition doesn't mean they're not useful anymore. The only thing that won't happen is books won't be released officially that will support the Sabbat being presented in a way other than the way the V5 Sabbat are presented. But the good news is those books exist for previous editions. So if you like them as they were, use them as they were. Simple as that. Phelan says this is a lovely chat, and I've recently rewatched all of your old Vampire the Masquerade videos. Back then, I was a lot younger. Thanks for helping me get the guts to try storytelling. Well, thank you very much for supporting my videos, Phelan. I really appreciate it. If you want to support me a fraction more, look up Trinity Continuum Aether on Kickstarter and give it your support. It means a lot to me if you do. It's a role-playing game set in the 19th century, steampunk Martians, Jekyll and Hyde, changing bodies, Rube Goldberg devices that can change reality, all kinds of weird and wonderful shiz like that. And Rick Reeds was looking for my Dear Esther actual play. Another one I really enjoyed doing. I don't know if I kept... Actually, I think that's on my other channel, maybe. The one I got locked out of. The gent in question. So there's a lot of videos on there that I probably would have deleted if I still had the access to it. Lyshote says, I'd already backed Aether. Back it again. Add a story guide screen. Martin, I was just looking through your linked Kickstarter project. Will there be additional rulebooks? In my experience, core rulebooks are nice, but there's a lot of stuff in other books. Yes, we've already funded some books for stretch goals with Aether. So we're already getting an Aethernaut collection of characters, such as Jekyll Hyde, Mina Harker, probably Dracula, probably more Martians, Moriarty and Colonel Moran, Captain Nemo, all of that lot. They're going to be detailed. We'll also get a jumpstart as a full-blown adventure with the rules in, with ready-made characters too. So yeah, there will be more books coming for Aether. And if the Kickstarter does well, we'll do more books that aren't as part of the Kickstarter. Simon says, it's for Vampire the Dark Ages. Ah, yes, your story. I'll see if I can find that Vault website. Yes, just look up Storyteller's Vault. R says, if I was to be embraced by any Methuselah, which one would you pick and why? Which Methuselah? Oh, God, they're all pretty dreadful. There aren't many Methuselahs that aren't manipulative, controlling, evil, utterly debased, mainly because they're so old that they have lost all track of what humanity actually is. So you may look at someone like Menele or Menel and think, well, he's demonstrably nicer than Helena, but he is still utterly controlling, blood bonds his child and descendants, and exerts influence over them whether he wants to or not. So there aren't really any good Methuselahs to have as a sire. I would go for one who probably doesn't care about what I do after they embrace me. So let's go for... God. I'll go for... I mean, she's close to being Methuselah. I don't know if she quite is. I'll go for Inyanga, the Gangrel that was in Chicago by Night prior to 5th edition. She seems all right. I mean, she may be a Libon, I think, but she's all right. Not a Gangrel. I think it's Beckett's Jihad Diary that establishes that she isn't, that she may be an Akunansi instead. Possibly. Rick Reed says, I love H.G. Wells and RPG, so we'll take a look at Aether. That is exactly what it's for. So I think we will call it there. I've often said I think a Gangrel would probably be the best clan to be, and I stand by that. So yeah, I think I'm going to call it there. Unless, actually, you know what? Let's go for 3 more questions. We'll have 3 more questions. So the next 3 questions that come in, I will answer them. So make sure they're good ones. Make sure they're good. Because if they're not, I won't answer them. So you've got 3 questions. 3 questions you can ask. And then I'm retiring for the night. And Quadia says, see you Monday. Is late. Oh, okay. So we're getting Vampire the Masquerade questions. Let's see if anyone can ask a. Well, I'll only do a next stream, Martin, if I see people backing Aether. If there's no comments, this is it. No more 2-hour streams. That's for damn sure. Well, right now we are seeing a lot of World of Darkness questions. Are there any others? No, the 4-hour stream, I think not. All right, so I'm going to start answering some of these questions. Are the True Bruja still considered canon? Yeah, they are still considered canon. They probably just won't ever be mentioned in V5. I can't see the True Bruja being mentioned outside of Easter egg references. The True Black Hand, the same. I've made loads of references in the books I've developed to various tidbits, bits of information. Even I think the Lianon show up in a form in Let the Streets Run Red. In fact, if you were closely watching in there, but I don't think it's the direction of V5 that it's going to contain the True Bruja as a big playable time traveling option. That's probably for the best. R says, if you were fully in charge of Mage V5, what direction would you take it in? I would probably do something most Mage fans would despise, and that's destroy the foundations of the traditions. They would not be hierarchical blocks with politics. I think that the Ascension time would have come. Technocracy probably would have won. And that means mages are incredibly rare. So you're less defined by your tradition and more defined by your spheres. So it becomes much more, I know everyone's tired of hearing this kind of thing, street level, more Matrix-like, where your characters basically become aware that they have abilities and then gain access to what the real world is. But it's a very limited perspective because I don't like the idea of towers of hermetics and towers of virtual adepts and so on in every damn city. I think that for me diminishes any horror from Mage the Ascension. I think being more isolated as an awakened is a more interesting story. So at the very least, I would make the traditions crumble from their giddy heights that they appeared in previous editions. Simon says, hope you have an endurable, good summer. It's late here in Iceland. Happy you got to catch up. Well, happy you got to tune in, Simon. Bro says, pick a random quip from the deck, tarot style. Let's do that. Let's pick a random quip from the deck. We will go for the Camp Murder Lake deck. So they came from Camp Murder Lake, which next to They Came From Classified is my favorite of the They Came Froms. Is our slasher movie They Came From. You can actually buy it through MatthewDawkins.com. Just go there. You can find a link. And we'll go for quip here. We'll go for boring. Fucking boring. Excellent. Well, that's the monetization gone. Simon says, I'm not backing Aether. Well, I appreciate your honesty, but I will send you a donation that I've found now that I've found your donation link. That's very kind of you, Simon. Thank you very much. I do appreciate it. Martin says, how can you bring a character with true faith joining interested in summoning a demon cult? With difficulty. If you want to play a character with true faith, they're probably not going to want to summon a demon. Adam, do you think a computer game could ever do Wraith justice? Yeah, absolutely. I would probably make it more like Disco Elysium or Planescape Torment than anything else. Oh god, there's also questions now, so we'll keep going. And then we will... people are asking for a link to my webpage, so I will put it here in the chat. There you go. All right, I will finish off these questions, and I'm going to go. To close things out, what do you feel makes Aether stand out and will attract people to the game? Few things. DP, good question. One, it's the art. I think the art for Aether is looking absolutely amazing. It's vivid, it's fantastic, it's colourful. It grabbed me as soon as I saw it. So that's one thing. Two, the ability to play around with all of your favourite characters and events from the classic era of fiction, of gothic horror fiction. Every character from the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, to put it just mildly, but also the chance to play in a 19th century game subject to a Martian invasion. How fun is that? Three, I think the ability to create your own science through Aether, your own ability, your own reality, change history is also greatly appealing. And play it against the backdrop of empire, of colonies, of subjugation, of classism that existed at the time, provides a lovely historical insight that means you can actually examine a historical period through an interesting prism. So hopefully that all appeals to you. Tal says it seems hard to imagine how, if the Martians are so advanced, they don't just run over anyone who's not a squire, Gog, or Magog, and at the other end, if a Magog is God, how have the Martians survived? Very good question. It's all in the book. Plus, the Martians have only just started attacking in 1895 when the book is set, so that's how the Martians have survived. Saria, Velvet says that will be a very interesting Mage game. Thank you. Saria says, have you ever considered doing an audio book? I mean, I did many chapters out of the Scarred Lands novel over on the Onyx Path website, but I believe I've got the vocal chops to do an audio book, but honestly, I would need to be approached to do it. I have enough work on my plate already that someone would basically need to ask me to do it and pay me to do it, otherwise I'm not going to do it. Says, I'd love that for Mage. Wonderful. I should be developing Mage, shouldn't I? Martin says, have a nice summer. Good night. And you'll read the Kickstarter. Thank you. And who is bored of Matrix Mages? No one should be bored of Matrix Mages. And they have a VR game about Wraith on Steam. They do indeed, but I don't play with VR. I don't have a house big enough to have VR headset. All right. And Simon sent me a PayPal donation. I can't say much fairer than that, can I? Well, if you're not interested in sending me a PayPal donation, viewers, do go on Trinity Continuum Aether's Kickstarter page. I would really appreciate it. It should be in the video description below. Back it at any level, even if it's just for $5 to view the manuscript, and then you can review later whether you're going to purchase the whole book. I would really love it if you did. If you do, go on the comments on that Kickstarter, say that I sent you. You never know. It might tell us how useful these kinds of videos are. But most of all, thank you so much for tuning in to this long video. It's damn long AMA. Clearly, everyone had questions bottled up about the World of Darkness. A lot of World of Darkness questions, but I never get bored of answering them. So thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. And until next time, everybody, bye-bye.